Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm well. Hope you guys are doing well.
Hanging in there.
Glad I don't live in Western North Carolina.
Yeah, we're still waiting to hear from our mediator in Asheville and program assistant, but I know, internet access is iffy, and I'm sure work email is last on the list of things to look at.
So I've been in fairly regular contact with the 5 chiefs of the 5 westernmost districts.
Yeah.
They didn't have cell service until Sunday or Monday at their homes. They were literally driving to Walmart where there was a hotspot to have cell service to be able to text or call, and they weren't getting any of their state email. But I think all their cell service is restored now, at least on a temporary basis. Because I texted with them yesterday and I got immediate responses from 3 of them. And so I think that piece is getting better, but it's pretty ugly out there.
Yeah. I have a friend who lives in this very small community about an hour outside of Asheville. Luckily, she was not there, but she's in touch with the people, and they hiked 15 miles to get access to water and cell phone and all of that. So, yeah, it's pretty crazy. Yeah. I was hearing some weather person talk about how there's something that sometimes happens right before a hurricane, especially on the 30 side of the hurricane, which is like the pre-storm, which, made everything, all the rivers higher. There's this rain that comes in before the hurricane.
So when you look at it on the radar and it's spinning counterclockwise, you can see how bands go way up north and east of the storm. And that's what
Right.
they're talking about. It dumps lots of rain. That's how, for example, with Florence, we ended up with 36 inches of rain over 3 days.
Right. Yeah.
And that's what hammered that whole corridor from Florida up through North Carolina, Tennessee.
Yeah. And plus it was moving so fast.
Plus the mountains accelerate the rain process.
Mm.
So anyway, it was a perfect storm for them.
Yeah.
Hey, Rick.
Rick, can you hear us? I don't think so.
Michelle's on too. Michelle,
Yeah.
can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I'm
Can you hear
walking
me?
into the
Yes.
courthouse.
I don't
Get,
I don't know what's wrong with my video. It says I'm trying to start it, but
Oh, almost. It almost happened.
And the live stream and recording is on, y'all.
All right, thank you.
yeah. I'll leave the video button on. Maybe it will start working eventually. Y'all don't need to see me this morning.
Cheryl, it's always good to see you.
It's good to see you all. I was just talking to some folks in Asheville. And it's just,
Oh,
my heart breaks for them.
Yeah.
so Cheryl, how's Sarah's cabin, and was Sarah at her cabin during this?
No, Sarah was not at her cabin, and she's extremely worried. She doesn't have any way to get any news. Nobody can get there, so she's a little worried. And it's, she's also getting married next Friday, so she's extremely excited about that. But they're nervous about going off for their honeymoon, not knowing anything about the house. But she'll be all right. She knows it's just a house.
Well, I'm glad she wasn't there for it.
Yeah. We're very thankful for that. And none of her neighbors were there either. So that's part of the reason that they don't know what's going on, is because nobody was actually there. But that's
So Rob Martell is headed into Old Fort tomorrow. I've been talking to Rob and Ted and Kim, Roy, and Calvin.
yeah.
And it's a mess out there.
Rick, are you able to hear us? Okay.
Okay, good.
And Michelle, did you tell us you're outside the courthouse?
yeah, I'm in Chatham. I have something in about half an hour that I just need to kind of check in with, and then I should hopefully be able to rejoin after that.
We have a lot of people who need to be on a 10 a.m. meeting. So I don't think it's going to be a super long meeting. But thank you for joining us.
Carrie and Stephanie, have you heard from others about whether they were going to be able to join or not join?
Yeah, I heard from a few. Let me go back and Nisha was going to be able to join. Judge Walzek was not. Valerie was going to join if she could. And that's really all I heard from. All the AOC folks knew as not being voting members. They weren't planning on coming. Marcy was planning on coming. So I guess the two that I would be expecting would be Nisha and Marcy. I can email them if you want.
If you don't mind.
Sure.
Bill, does it look on your side like your video's on? Because we can't see you, but this has happened before where it shows up like as this gray square.
Yeah,
Hmm.
no, I was just on Zoom last night and it was working fine, but
Yeah.
I'm messing with the settings, hoping that it will help, but I definitely don't know what I'm doing.
Cheryl, on some laptops, there's a little switch that you can almost not even see right at the top of your screen beside where the camera light is. And that may have been, sometimes I've inadvertently turned that switch off.
Yeah, if you run your finger actually on the rim above the camera. I remember help desk helping me with this. I was like, there's nothing up there, but there's this little indentation. And if you click on that,
I'm trying.
well, at least you're
Yep.
here.
Yep, that's what it is, because I just turned mine off and I got the same gray box.
It's hard to
Hmm.
describe where it is though, right? Like if you run your finger actually on the rim, on the part of the rim that's closest to you, right before the camera, right up with the camera, there's a neat little. I think sometimes we hit that because I did the same thing, Judge Corpening, and I think when we're opening and closing the laptop, we hit it.
No luck so far.
Well, we've got Marcy with us. Why don't we go ahead and start our discussion? Hey, Marcy. So welcome everybody to this special meeting of our committee. Stephanie, would you like to introduce the topic for conversation? Carrie
Sure.
sent an email and sort of why we're meeting before our regular scheduled meeting.
Sure. You all may remember at our last meeting, one of the issues that I brought to the committee was the fact that some attorneys have asked us if there's any way that we can include, particularly around drug costs, anything dealing with costs. And they were looking at the statute that prohibited it from being an issue sent to mediation, but it didn't seem to prohibit parties from including it in their agreement. And I told these attorneys that, the CMAQ had already talked about this and met about this, and that it was a slippery slope unless the statute was changed. And so what the meeting, and stop me if I have this wrong, was that I would ask OGC here at AOC if there was a possibility of having a discussion about some amendment to the statute that would allow a narrow scope of costs in a parenting agreement. And when I approached them, they were super busy with a million things, but just recently got back to me and said, send us the possible language. And we'll take they don't know. They're going to look at it and then talk to the director, but they wanted to know if we had any possible language. We hadn't gotten that far because we didn't even know if it was something OGC would want to entertain. So then they told me that we have, because I thought maybe this meeting was too late, and they were like, no, you have enough time to send us something. So really, I don't even, we hadn't gotten that far. Um, and so I think that's what we were talking about today, is the wisdom of it and what it would look like if we should do it.
All right, then the floor is open for discussion.
I guess they didn't comment on whether they thought an amendment was necessary to do what we want to do or what the attorneys are asking for.
No, they didn't have any comment other than send us the language. And that's why, I mean, it was, I didn't know where to go with that because we hadn't really, as a committee, really talked much about the details of it. So I think Judge Corpening, you were thinking that they might set up a meeting with you and some other members first, but before we got to this point.
I haven't heard from them. You know, and Steph, this is a slippery slope, but in the examples that Carrie sent us as part of the email with the link, I can see including provisions for drug screens. That's a really common issue. The travel piece that was in one of the examples I see as a financial issue that I think that the statute prohibits, but I'm not sure the statute actually as it's currently written prohibits including drug screens and cost for drug screens. But Cheryl, I'm interested in what you think about that.
No, you know, we haven't had any, as long as we've had this statute, we haven't had any case law, you know, interpreting it at all. I double checked to be sure, but I didn't think I'd seen anything. I think, you know, what it literally says is that financial issues can't be referred to mediation, but I'm not sure that that means that people can't agree. I mean, and I think that any appellate court reviewing it would have a hard time saying that parties couldn't agree to something like that in a parenting agreement. But you know, for purposes of the mediators and having clear guidance on, you know, what they should and shouldn't go into or spend time during the mediation process, I think it's a good rule to say across the board, you know, we're not dealing with financial issues. But one of the things I was wondering is if we could deal with this rather than trying to amend the statute, if we could, you know, deal with it in the guidelines or in the rules, to say, you know, something along the lines of, you know, drug testing can be included by agreement of the parties, and we could word it the way that, you know, we'd have to work on it. I think, you know, I think you're right about the travel cost, only because, I mean, I'm a little more concerned about the travel cost just because our, the statutes actually refer to that particular cost as being a type of child support. So, but again, I think that all this really says is that it can't be forced into mediation, but I'm not sure that that means that parties can't agree to do it. So I think we probably have more leeway with this statute than you know, I don't think it's that strict. It's just a matter, I think, of this group determining what kind of guidance we want to give the mediators, if that makes sense.
I have a question. Is it I mean, so I guess I was thinking about language about facilitating the actual, you know, implementation of their agreement. Like what, you know, like but being specific, maybe it, you know, because if they have this agreement that hinges on mom, you know, having drug screens prior to exercising her visitation, you know, I guess that they agree on. I guess we'd want to support what we can in order for them to have the freedom to do that in mediation, because it facilitates the basically, you know, them complying with the agreement.
Right. And is it primarily the drug testing that we're concerned about? Is there any other cost? I know the travel comes up.
I mean, there are other costs. We usually, the other ones don't come up as frequently as drug testing, but sometimes people are talking about the need for their child or their family to get into counseling and who's going to cover that.
Mm.
But I would say drug testing is by far the most common one. And, you know, the attorney who contacted me said that very same thing that you were saying, Cheryl, like, it
Right.
doesn't seem like there's anything, they've already
Right.
agreed to this, can't we just put it in? But then my question is, well, what if they come in and agree to all kinds of other financial things like,
Right.
counseling? What do we
Right,
tell
and I think that's one of the reasons that, you know, we've always been so strict on this, is that, I mean, it's mostly to protect the mediators and to make it really clear that financial issues are not something that we're supposed to be talking about, whether they agree to or not. And I think that that's probably a good idea. It's a good strategy. But you know, I think that we could, given the language of the statute, I think that we could say that, you know, that we could do something in the rules to say, you know, something very explicit like drug testing and counseling could be agreed to.
Yeah, and I would just say that there's a lot of agreements that, you know, the people work really hard and get to a pretty good either, say, 6-month agreement or full agreement. And it all hinges on this drug testing. Like, say somebody's, you know, sober for 3 years and a parent is worried about their relapse. And so they put in place a relapse plan that involves like drug testing or whatever. And they come up with this ingenious plan of who's going to pay. But we, you know, we can't help them with that. So then they can't move forward. You know, they spent 2 hours and they've crafted all of this, and then they're, you know, they're not going to sign something without that.
I mean, my thought is that it would be great to include be very specific, since we're concerned about the slippery slope. Right?
Right.
Because the goal is to encourage people to invest in the process, and that the process will hopefully address a lot of the issues such that they don't come to court, right? And if they're having to come to court just for the issue of who's going to pay, you know, because the mediator's hands are tied about who, you know, negotiating, well, who's going to pay for it, but how it gets paid. So even say that they agree on like who's going to pay for it, but literally how does it get paid? You can't even say that. So I mean, I think we should, in order to help give the mediator that freedom at least, but be probably, like Cheryl said, very specific. You're only helping talk about these specific things, and they're for the purpose of facilitating the enforcement or whatever of the agreement.
I think, you know, if it's viable, having it changed and having it put into the uniform rules would make it, I mean, you all know better than I do, but it seems like if that would work, that'd be a whole lot easier.
That was my question, or the question that rose to me in this part of the discussion. Is we're now thinking about adapting or amending the rules, uniform rules, correct? We're not discussing amending the statute. Is that kind of where we are?
I mean, that's what I was suggesting, just
Yeah.
given the specific language that's in the statute. I mean, I don't know what you all think, but when I look at it, I think that we probably could do that. You know, and I'm thinking about what, you know, just what the appellate courts have allowed judges to do in custody cases, you know, that are not, you know, and they don't really deal with it as child support. So I think, anyway, I just think that it's probably okay legally under the language of the statute to do it by rule rather than by amending the statute. I think amending the statute obviously is a much more complicated process.
The other thing about the uniform rules is we can get really detailed bullet points,
Right.
everything we need.
Right.
And then if we, and I guess this is more for Judge Courtney or any other judges who are tuning in right now. I'm thinking we don't want to have mediators checking in all the time with judges about what they can and cannot discuss.
Right.
But if we cover, some specific incidences and maybe add a little bit, other matters may be presented to the chief district court judge for a decision. Is that a possibility to maybe, my concern is if we get very specific about it, this is just going to come back to us because something else is going to come up. And if we have a little, what's the word I want? Little escape clause in there just in case something else comes up.
Yeah, Rick, my concern is that that's where we get on the slippery slope.
Yeah.
Right.
Because a chief may not look back at the statute and see
Right.
what's permissible or not before saying, sure, go ahead and include that.
Okay.
And then all of a sudden we've got a local practice that runs afoul of the statute. So my personal belief is that I do agree that rule amendment is much easier than statute amendment. It means we've got complete control over what it says, and it won't be amended in committee without us having any input,
Mhm.
for example.
Mhm.
And I think that the more specific we are, the better. And we know now over time it's going to come back to us anyway, Rick.
Okay.
And so I'm a fan, depending on what everybody else thinks, of working on some language for the rule that would permit drug screens and allocating costs for drug screens. I hear that from my family court colleagues here in Wilmington, that they would like to see that. Because they certainly want mediated settlement agreements more frequently. They're more durable than contested court hearings. So I'd be a fan of looking at the rule, but I'm open to others who haven't weighed in yet.
I've been listening, but I tend to agree, especially as it relates to our ability to control what the final wording is. If we seek to amend a statute, we at some point will lose or could lose control versus the rule change. And again, as people are seeking guidance, as this rule change gets implemented, we can also meet folks where they're at and have that greater ability to further edit, clarify in the future if we need to, once a rule is implemented. So and I too agree that I think the concern of drug costs, drug testing cost in particular, and that potentially terminating a mediation when we know cost is so big for folks, and folks feel a greater need to hire attorneys once they leave out of mediation. So in particular, thinking about survivors of domestic violence, they may feel like they're able to have a little bit more control in that mediation space if they can have conversations around drug testing and those type of limited financial issues. So I agree with Cheryl, and I'm happy to proceed and help develop that language.
I agree. I think that's a good plan. I'm on the side of working with the rules and seeing what we can develop. And I'm not sure what next steps would be. We have some input already. Clearly, I mean, Carrie sent out some notes, but should we go forward with that, or is there some sort of more research we can do to find out if there are other issues? Maybe check in with the mediators specifically to see before we actually draft any kind of amendments to the rules.
I would, I mean, I can tell you some of the other issues, but I think it'd be wise to start here and see, do you really want to open that can of worms?
I would even call it Pandora's box.
Ouch. Okay.
I'm sorry, so
Keep it
Stephanie,
closed.
I'm sorry, Stephanie, are you saying that you don't think it's a good idea to include that in the rule? Is that what I hear you saying?
No.
Oh,
no,
okay.
No.
Oh, you just, oh, you don't want to ask about, is there anything else we should, I got you. Okay.
I mean, it seems like we're kind of looking at this narrow scope and decide on that before we.
Right. And I do think it's a good idea to keep it very specific and very limited.
Well,
So
and
to clarify,
this-
go ahead, Cheryl.
I was just
Or
going to
whoever.
say, we need to do some updates to the uniform rules anyway because of enterprise justice. There are some things in there that don't apply anymore, and our standards as well. So we had planned to bring both of those to CMAC, like we talk about having a locked file drawer for printed intake forms. You know, we need to make some updates
Hmm.
overall.
Well, why
But to
don't we,
clarify for me, we're really looking at two basic issues right now today. One would be financial issues surrounding drug testing, and the other would be financial issues surrounding travel that's related to custody arrangements.
I think we need to think more about travel, but I wrote down drug screening and maybe counseling, but I imagine that travel probably is an issue in a lot of the cases, but I don't know. I'd like to hear what you all think about that. Is that something that would be very helpful? It's just the one that from a legal perspective, I'm a little more concerned about.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, there's all kinds of financial things that people would
Right.
like to include.
Right.
I don't see any of them, I mean, and Kristen, you know, let me know what you think, but I don't see any of them as big of a deal breaker and as complicated as the drug testing. And the thing about the drug testing is between the two parents. All
Right.
these other things start to involve the children, and I'm always remembering, Cheryl, what you said about that kind of slipping into child support territory, because the travel often involves who's going to pay for the travel to go visit dad in California, something like that.
Right.
And I mean, if we're going to include things like that, I have a long list.
Right. Right. And I do think that a travel agreement could impact child support in a way that I don't think the counseling, well, I mean, the drug testing would. So I just think that's more complicated.
so then I have a suggestion. The reason we called this meeting today was so that we could get language to legal, to get it approved, to get it to the General Assembly. And by not trying to do statutory reform and by going back to rulemaking, then I would suggest that we just have draft language presented at our next regular custody mediation advisory committee meeting. That way we can talk of the enterprise justice issues, we can talk about drug screens and look at that policy, and then start the process of amending our rules. What do y'all think about that?
Sounds like a good plan.
Good plan.
But if we work on the language, are we going to limit it to drug screening? The other thing that I heard you all mention was counseling. But did we decide just the drug screening?
So I have a question for y'all, because the counseling issue usually is who's going to pay for the child's counseling.
Yeah.
Yep.
So is that, I mean, is that on or off the table?
I'm just in favor of keeping it really simple and very straightforward. And the counseling goes in, again, it's something that's specifically listed as in the child support guidelines. And so I think we are getting into something that would impact child support in a way that the drug screening won't.
Right.
So if you think it would, meet the need to limit it to drug screening, I think that's the thing that's probably the easiest, and that we don't have to worry about it running into any problems.
Yeah, and I think Nisha even volunteered to help work on some language.
I think that's what I heard. Yeah.
I did. And after I said it, I was like, man, I literally have somebody in my office got me this Post-it note, and on it, it says, "Stop me before I volunteer again." And I have two of them like on my laptop, and yet I'm still out here volunteering, so yeah. Work on something.
So let me ask Nisha and Cheryl to work with Steph and Carrie on that drug test language before our next mediation advisory committee. And then Stephanie and Carrie, if y'all will take a look at the enterprise justice changes. I got no idea. We've started our weekly meetings. We're rolling out February 3rd. So I have zero understanding at this point. But if y'all will, those two groups will work, and then we'll come back together again at our regular meeting and look at least giving mediators the tools to deal with drug screens. And I think that'll be helpful.
Mhm.
I do too. Sure.
So our next meeting is November 8th, and the staff at the AOC just alerted me there's still going to be construction going on, so they suggested we make that an online meeting rather
Okay.
than meeting in a break room.
Okay.
So if that works for everybody, we can send out language ahead of time and just have the meeting online.
Sounds good.
I'm seeing head bobbing.
I'll see if I can get my video fixed before the next meeting.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. Great discussion. Feel like that this is really positive.
All right. Everybody have a good weekend.
Thanks, everybody.
Good weekend.
Take care.